I was coaching a leader and they took the LCP probably, let's say 5 years ago. And then they retook it like last year. And it was so stark, like the growth that they had experienced. The one they took 5 years ago, they were very clearly below the line. So they were in their reactive self and they were a high performer, and that approach served them well. It kind of got them to where they were. But then once they took it and they realized, oh, wow, I have all of these like reactive tendencies. And when they took it again 5 years later, the entire graph had flipped and now they were totally above the line. And they had grown in their position. So they went from like an entry level position to now they're like director level position. And so it just showed like the growth that they had experienced, not just from a leadership perspective, but also the growth in the progress in their employment and, you know, their hierarchy, like, you know, going from an entry level role manager to a director level. It just really blew my mind. And they looked at they kind of compared and like, wow, like, yeah, I've been putting in the work to really focus on how I can grow as a leader. And it's very clear the feedback my peers, my colleagues, my supervisor are giving me, and also how I see myself. I can see that I am now a different leader, right? A leader that is able to really operate at a director level, almost on an executive director level. So yeah, I think it's a phenomenal tool.
You bring up a really important point in that, like, I think oftentimes those things that are kind of, you know, quote unquote, below the line or reactive, you know, complying, going along with direction,
Yep.
or like people pleasing, saying yes all the time, or even controlling, right? The assertive, like, I'm going to go and I'm going to get this stuff done no matter what. Like, those things actually do sometimes work really well when
Yeah.
you're an individual contributor.
Yep.
And then
100%.
in those early stages of leadership, like, we think the things that got us there are the things that we should keep doing. And that's when that big shift happens. And so
Yep.
I totally appreciate that. Like, 5 years ago, this leader really probably was in that zone and then realized, like, to be effective, I need to kind of get myself into that creative space.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. So, like, just a quick lay of the land for, you know, folks that are listening and haven't been staring at this profile like you and I have for
Right.
many hours. It's a circle.
Yeah.
And the top of that circle is what we're talking about, these creative tendencies. So there's 18 different dimensions of that. And I think it's like, you know, split into, okay, so I'm looking at my paper here. It's relating. If you summarize them into these 5 buckets, it's relating, self-awareness, authenticity, systems awareness, and achieving.
Yep.
And then the bottom is these 11 kind of reactive tendencies that we're talking about, right? The things that take you off track, the things that like get in the way of relating to other people or paying attention to what's going on in your own emotional world. And so they fit in these 3 buckets of complying, protecting, and controlling, which is kind of what I was referencing a bit before. Going along with what everyone says, or people pleasing, or, you know, being kind of like more kind of arrogant and autocratic and like taking things on yourself. So
yeah. And some people might hear the word protecting and feel like, oh, shouldn't I be protecting? But it's really around like arrogance, being critical, being distant, right? So you're protecting yourself. I think that's the key, is that protecting is like you are guarded, you are defensive, you are shielding off, and you're not being authentic, you're not being transparent, you're not being vulnerable to the people that you lead.
yeah. And then so you've got this creative and reactive, top and bottom. And then on the sides, on the left and the right, so think about it as quadrants. You know this, obviously,
Yep.
but for anyone who hasn't seen this, there's relationship and task. So I love that it's like in a relational world, there's, call it shadow ways that you might show up. And there are, you know, these great like leader ways that you show up. And then in tasks, it's similar. There are shadow ways that you might show up. And then there are leadership ways that you might show up. And so one of the, not to get too nerdy here, but one of the reasons that I loved this tool and was like drawn to it in the first place, for all the reasons I already mentioned, but then also I work with something called Enneagram a lot. And so it's nine different types. And there's a layer of Enneagram that actually uses this kind of these 3 things, the complying, protecting, and the controlling. But they're called compliant, withdrawn, and assertive. And they're the same 3 buckets, and they come from the same place. It's this psychologist, Karen Horney, who was one of the first people back when, like, Freud and all these like big names in psychology were kind of like pathologizing people to be like, this is deficient in you. And that's the only thing we talk about in psychology. She made it more human to say, these three buckets are manifestations of like anxiety. Like they're coping mechanisms, right? There are three different ways that we cope and get our needs met when we're kids. And therefore they like then develop into these things that we overuse as adults. And it just like, she was one of the very first people to like bring kind of more humanity to psychology, and then like kind of launched a space that a lot of other people jumped into after that. So like, that's kind of my nerdy psychology background, but like the matchup with the Enneagram, and then the fact that this was like such a pivotal point, and like, instead of saying there's something wrong with you, it's like, you needed to do this and you don't need to do it anymore, like, is a really kind of like thing that I'm really passionate about.